During the last 2 years, each of the United States' four masters of musical minimalism, Terry Riley, Lamonte Young, Steve Reich, and Philip Glass, turned 80. They are all still composing, performing, and proselytizing for their own aesthetic visions. Their bodies of work are reminders that the scenes shaped by critics are mere circumstances, are rarely cohesive, they are disconnected threads, sewn together by necessity or dumb luck. To this day, for instance, Young remains the philosophical ascetic, the one who told The Guardian in 2015, "I'm only interested in putting out masterpieces despite having not released a record for nearly 2 decades. Riley is the imaginative mystic, the avuncular sort whose sense of play and exploded psychedelia has made him a multi-generational Pied Piper. Glass is the crossover king, a composer whose twin senses of delicacy and bombast led to exquisite etudes and, for better and worse, that indelible Koyaanisqatsi score. Reich has long sat squarely near the middle. A bit like Young, he is perennially devoted to a small clutch of consistent ideas, forever in pursuit of the perfect pulse, a pointillist exhibition. But like Glass, his popular appeal owes something to his openness to diverse settings, whether that be the cascade of voices into Hillam or Pat Metheny's guitar in electric counterpoint. He seems a flexible ideologue, then, a centrist in a field of extremists. But Pulse Quartet, Reich's first major release since Radio Rewrite, his pallid exposition on 2 Radiohead songs, reaffirms that position in the dullest possible way, through technical challenges meant to push his familiar approach to new ends. Pulse is one of Reich's works for a large ensemble, 4 violins, 2 violas, 2 flutes, and 2 clarinets, all undergirded by the persistent plunk of the piano and electric bass. For 15 minutes, Reich weaves interpretations of a single theme above a static pulse, hoping to form a tapestry from a nice melody resurfaced with rich harmony. It is, well, pleasant. Pulse feels like the score for a short film about the heroism of an office worker's rote existence, where a daily merry-go-round of busy work means nothing significant ever happens. Time and again, Pulse reaches for some grand shift to climax just to settle back down and repeat the same idea through a slightly different framework. It is an interesting compositional exercise best reserved for the classroom, a sitcom long shrug that's pretty enough to be called beautiful and boring enough to be called tedious. And as the rubber band of an electric bass plucks away in the distance, one wonders what Reich's music might sound like if he saw the low end as more than a metronome. Pulse offers no clue. Written for 2 pianos and 2 vibraphones, Quartet is a multiplayer pinball game of rapid-fire key changes and rhythmic acrobatics, where mallets on metals and hammers on strings bound off one another like permanent foils. Reich truncates the classic quartet form, dropping the middle minuet in order to create hyperactive bookends for his slow second section. The result, writes Timo Andres in the liner notes, is like one of those Reich remixed albums, but this time the DJ is Reich himself. The sentiment is correct. Quartet moves constantly in at least one dimension, whether speeding up or shifting keys or dropping to a near whisper. It suggests a real-time mixtape, spliced together from the influences on and highlights of Reich's career. There are evocative moments, too, especially when the pianos and vibraphones lock into deep, passing grooves that reflect spirited conversation, not circumstantial crosstalk. But as with Pulse, its desired effect is minimal, a wash of motion that leaves the listener largely in the same place, in awe of Reich's expertise in the indefatigable instrumental skills of the Colin Currie group, but unfazed by the busy rush of so much sound. Context does Pulse Quartet no favors. Reich has rarely been a pure stylist or technician, even if his landmark music for 18 musicians hints otherwise. Instead, HES often wrestled with big, burdensome issues: the struggle for civil rights in the United States, the arbitrary indiscretion of tragedies such as the Holocaust, the assassination of Jewish journalist Daniel Pearl in Pakistan just after 9/11, and the events and implications of 9/11 itself. Reich's socio-political spine has distinguished him from his minimalist peers, making his work matter in ways many have not risked. But Pulse and Quartet feel plucked from a vacuum, a place where flickers of dissonance yield to waves of redemptive harmony and where the chord always comes back to sparkle. In a world of increasing entropy, these are two tidy self-reflections, Reich on what made Reich great. It's not necessarily the burden of the composer to make music that speaks to or for these times, of course. Pulse, after all, premiered exactly a week before the popular vote lost another presidential election. Quartet came 2 years earlier. But, if anything, False Quartet recalls the balm and spark provided by Reich's most provocative stuff and demands you long for it, that is, the politically and historically charged work that made Reich's place in the center seem so undaunted and daring.